Hello and welcome to another edition of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Um, Folks, empathy. I want to just kind of touch on this question of, do you think you're an empathetic person? And partly the reason I asked that is my guest today, we're going to unbundle that in a little bit. She's done some amazing work in this area. One of the questions I pose with the leaders that I work with is, how do you think people feel about themselves when they're in your presence? And if you're not paying attention to that, you're going to be missing some incredible opportunities to excel, not just get along. Um, Dr. Nicole Price has written a book called Spark the Heart. And I first met Nicole when David Meltzer, my partner, and I, were hosting an office hours show a number of weeks back. And she was on the show, and I was absolutely in rapt awe of what she was talking about and what she was framing and how she was positioning some things here, particularly from a leadership perspective. Nicole's a chemist by trade, a chemical engineer. So, you think about chemical engineer, logical, linear thinking, that sort of thing. And to write a book on Spark the Heart that is a unbelievable deep dive into this question of empathy. And the book itself dispels common empathy myths, such as empathy is a trait that you're born with, and empathy requires you to take on the other person's beliefs and values, none of which are true necessarily at all. She's got an interesting way of framing this stuff, and her research really bears out a lot of the stuff that we're going to be exploring here today. So without further ado, Dr. Nicole Price, welcome to the show.
Blaine, I'm so glad to be here with you. This is so much fun.
I'm looking forward to it. And pre-show, we were talking a little bit about that. And this connection that I felt back then, when we were in a 15-minute little segment, there was something that was sparked in me that said, there's a connection here. You need to follow this up. So in the context of empathy, how does that, and I use the word spark, very specifically here, there was something that was kind of felt in me that said, this is somebody I want to spend some time with. I care about what she thinks. I care about who she is. I care about what she's up to in the world. Is that an example of empathy?
I would say that feeling that you have, I think is necessary in order to be able to demonstrate empathy to others. What you just described to me is that you are in touch with how you feel about things. And oftentimes people want to encourage leaders to be empathetic to others.
Mm-hmm.
We're working with leaders who've never been given the permission to feel anything. You ask people how they're doing today, Blaine, and what do they say? Fine or busy. Fine or busy.
Yep.
And neither fine nor busy are feelings. And if you ask people to think about how they feel, and I'm talking about myself too a while ago, we're more likely to tell you how we think or what we think, and less likely to tell you how we feel. And so I think the fact that you are in touch with your emotion, you were feeling what I was feeling at the same time, and that was a connection between us. That's how I view it, maybe.
I like that. And, it reminds me, I was doing some work with IBM another lifetime ago. And I was talking about, the feelings. I mean, this was back in the 80s. And feelings, it's kind of like, what that has no place in the work environment. What are you even bringing this up to the table for? And I literally had one of the engineers say, I don't know what that is. Yeah, and we had to get a dictionary out, and he wasn't being facetious. It was kind of like, this is not in my realm of experience. What is a feeling? And I was reminded of something that Ulysses wrote, and it was The Dubliner, I think was the actual book. And the opening line in the book was, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. And that phrase has always struck a chord in me, because that is my experience of how many leaders actually go through their day. They're a short distance from their body. It's an intellectual construct, and their focus and fixation is on results. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned here that empathy is a demonstrated process.
Yes.
I can feel something, but how do I actually demonstrate that? What's the behavioral analog? What does that look like? Where does
Yeah.
that come into play? How do you work with that with the people that you work with?
One of the critical learnings that I've had on my own empathy journey was that you can understand a thing and not do it or not practice it. I think I was expecting that because I was so far behind on my empathy journey, that I was going to join this empathy crusade, and there were going to be all these people who were masterful at how they demonstrate empathy. But what I found instead was people who practice selective empathy. So they know how
Uh-huh.
they know how to get you to be empathetic towards a group or a person they want you to be empathetic towards, but not a general empathy that is transferable across people and groups. No, no, they don't know how to do that. Um, and so what you and I think have also kind of talked about and what this looks like in practice is how can I in every interaction think about how I can understand better what the other person is thinking,
Hmm.
feeling, and believing, recognizing that it makes total sense to them. And that might not make any sense to me. But
Yeah.
from that level of understanding, now I can better communicate. I can make better decisions. I can maybe bring them along on my change initiatives, all sorts of things.
Boy, you open up a number of different rabbit holes here for
Uh,
me. This idea of sense making, that idea that I have to understand what you're doing um, before I can be demonstrating empathy. I don't need
yeah,
to understand what it is. I need to be curious about it and inquire about it, I think.
yeah,
But yeah, your world is different than mine, and I will probably never be able to make sense in the way that you make sense out of the world that we co-inhabit, because you're going
yeah,
to see it differently. But the idea of being able to at least suspend my preference for what you're doing or how we're thinking or how we're engaging, it's that suspension of preference that in my experience opens the door towards a different kind of a conversation. Is that a good assessment
I think
or a
so.
useful assessment?
I have an analogy. My friend Rick Robeson is an amazing navigator. And let's say you were directionally challenged. Rick would just ask, okay, which direction do you think is north? And you can tell him whatever you want. And he could give you directions, even if you were wrong, based off of what you thought north was. He could then tell you if you needed to turn right or left or where. It was masterful and it was quick too. He could do that so easily. And I think that's what you're saying. Like, how can I know what you think is north? And
Mm-hmm.
so now I can help you get to from where you are to wherever it is you want to be, recognizing that that's a leader's primary job, coaching folks to get from wherever they are to wherever they want to be. And whenever I get a chance to talk about these things, Blaine, in people's minds, they automatically go to some of the world's most nefarious people. Like,
Mm.
what if we're this way towards the most dangerous people in the world? And it's like, I just want you to be this way with your Aunt Gloria.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah,
you try with
exactly.
Aunt Gloria first?
Yeah. Start small.
Let's
Yeah.
start
Baby
small.
steps here. Yeah. Start small here. Yeah. The likelihood of me meeting Muammar Gaddafi or whatever is pretty remote. Yeah.
You're right. It's pretty remote. Or have you ever even been to a prison? Why are you thinking about the people who are in solitary confinement in the supermax prison? Like that is not your reality. But you work in finance and someone turns their expense report in one day late, and so now you won't give them their money, and they've never been late. It's like, okay, let's think about how we can just unpack the implications of a decision we might make and
Mm-hmm.
what would we want to happen if it were us. And Blaine, I keep saying that I think our opportunity is in the small areas.
Yeah.
Today I was in a conversation and a lady was late for a meeting we were in. And when I say late, I'm like, we're 60 seconds maybe after our supposed start time. It's going to be an all day meeting. Well, the person who's getting ready to introduce me says, well, I called her, I texted her, I don't know what happened. She was sick yesterday. Showing the text messages, I don't know where she is. And I just thought, if I were her, what would I want to be if let's say I am late and maybe I just overslept. I don't have a good reason even for being late. How would I be set up for the day if when I showed up, people were like, you didn't respond to my text message. I've told everybody here you were late. I also told them you were sick yesterday, versus if that were us, what would we want? People to just be happy we made it safely.
Mhm.
And if I have a issue with chronic tardiness, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But in general, how can we truly try to think about what would make someone's experience with us? What do we want? What did you say at the beginning? How do we want people?
How do people feel about themselves when they're in my presence?
Yes.
Do
Yeah,
they?
and there's a way to make people feel good about themselves even if late.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you talk about, and this is, I think, yeah, absolutely one of the themes that you consistently work towards. People want to do a good job, and that empathetic leadership is critical to leveraging that desire. I don't
Yeah.
honestly, I've never met anybody that consciously and deliberately sets out to screw something up. I've never met
No.
that person. I've heard about them hypothetically, but I've
Yeah.
never met that person. And I've worked with over 300, almost 400,000 people personally in the last
Yeah.
four decades. I mean, where is that person? People
Yeah.
want to
People
do a good job.
people want to do a good job. And when they're not doing a good job, there's circumstances, there's reasons. And if we can understand that better, we will be better coaches, we'll be better leaders. And I think sometimes it feels like I'm telling people this because I've studied it. Well, no, I didn't used to care. I honestly didn't used to care. I would have started my meeting today if that lady were late and not even thought about the fact that she were late. Our
Yeah.
start time is whatever our start time is, and we're starting. And when you get here, hello, welcome, and somebody else can recap you. I would have never even thought about it. But now I have a sensitivity that I can't go back. Just constantly thinking about how are things landing on the people who are experiencing me in my sessions and my workshops.
Yeah. Yeah. And that sensitivity goes a long way. I've got a hunch. Yeah. You had talked a little bit, earlier about, um, situational empathy. And as
Yeah.
you were talking about it, it kind of struck me that there's a difference between influencing and manipulation.
Mm.
And I'm going to be doing the same activity. I'm going to be doing the same thing. But if the intent is that I win and you lose, or that I win and I'm not too concerned about whether you win or not, there's going to be manipulation that comes into play here. And that's where I think situational empathy applies.
Right. And I think also that's one of the reasons why I am open about the dangers of empathy. Just as a concept. If you don't have that human center, you don't know how to feel, like we
Hmm.
talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Like your engineer you described was like, what are you talking
What are
about?
you talking about?
But intellectually, you know how to tap into what motivates people. You know how to understand them, what drives them, how they think. Well, I'm not so sure you're going to be able to use that for good if you don't also have some level of emotional intelligence or some human dignity center that is going to
Mhm.
guide your decision. And so I talk about all five types of empathy, but specifically cognitive or mental empathy is the one I work on the most because it's the easiest to teach. But I need but I need for people to have that emotional center. I need them to
Yeah.
have that to
Now, you,
build.
you just mentioned something here that I think is new news to me, and I know we touched on it a little bit in the office hours interview that we did, but it was new news to me then too. And I've got a hunch if it's new news to me, it's going to be new news to somebody that's listening right now. 5 types of empathy. Empathy isn't just empathy.
Empathy is not just empathy. In fact, I think I got into an argument. Can you be in an argument if the only one person is arguing? Only one
The
person
sound
is
of
arguing.
one hand clapping here.
Yeah, but it felt like an argument, even though there was only one person arguing. So I was talking about cognitive empathy and how it doesn't mean that I have to, it doesn't even mean that I'm nice or kind. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that I understand that how you're motivated and whatever you think, feel, or believe makes total sense to you. And that might guide my decisions. Well, she was very conversant with effective empathy, meaning when Blaine is sad, I feel sad. When Blaine is happy, I feel happy. That emotional connection.
Mhm.
And you can have one without the other. It's wonderful when they're in tandem, but you can be highly skilled in one. In fact, when I meet people who are burnt out because they're
Mhm.
so empathetic, it's usually because they're low on the cognitive empathy scale. Because what'll happen is they keep making decisions based on how someone feels, and
Mhm.
they have the inability to go, well, Blaine is not ready to work on this thing yet. And if I'm paying attention to what Blaine says and paying attention to what Blaine does, I understand that Blaine is not ready to do this yet. But
Yeah.
because they don't have that, they just keep going beyond what is reasonable. And so then they get burnt out. Another type is somatic empathy. So if you watch a fight and you cringe, even though you didn't get hit, or you watch somebody eat something that you find to be gross and you go, even though
Mhm.
you didn't eat it, that's somatic empathy. That's feeling in your body what another person is experiencing.
This is where the mirror neurons come in, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Compassionate empathy is actually you, and this one is your favorite, actually. I know this about you. It's when you take what you know from an empathetic perspective, but now you're motivated to do something about what you know. So I know something is harming you, or even I know something makes you happy. I'm motivated to act on it. Compassionate empathy.
Mhm.
And then there's one that I think I made up, but I call it radical empathy. And that,
Hey, you're the expert. You get to have your own one.
yeah, I made this one up, and it was because I was running into people who were incredibly empathetic in one area, but then if you wanted them to translate those skills to someone who was drastically different from them from a cultural
Mm.
standpoint, they
Mhm.
had the inability to do so. So
Oh.
let's say I'm really empathetic, but let's say my wealth category puts me in the lower threshold in the U.S. Like let's say I'm poor, and I'm incredibly empathetic. But then you put me in a situation where people have incessant amounts of wealth, and all of a sudden, let's say somebody has a mental health challenge in their wealth. I have been able to understand mental health challenges related to poor people my entire life. Maybe I work all around it, everything. But as soon as someone is rich and they have a mental health challenge, now I'm dismissive. I don't
Mm.
have the ability to empathize with that. Radical empathy is the ability to understand that there are different cultural influences, all different types, that demand that we stretch our empathy muscles to go beyond the groups that we know very well.
Mhm. I love that. Those distinctions are just fascinating, Nicole. They really are. Um, I mean, when what I love about this conversation and what I love about making these sorts of distinctions is it gives me, and I'll just speak for myself, it gives me a place to go to say, what do I do here?
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like if I use the word trust, there's no trust. Okay, what am I talking about? Is it
right.
competency? Is it character? What is it that is actually contributing to this thing that we're calling trust? Empathy, I just gotta know that people hear the word and they go, well, it's just a blanket, one size
Yeah.
fits all. Breaking it down in this way, I'm curious. I've done a fair amount of work with physicians and hospital administrators and hospital systems. I'm on the teaching faculty of the American Association for Physician Leadership, and burnout is a huge topic right now. And when you are, the the ability to go to a cognitive, empathetic, assessment rather than getting,
The
in
emotion.
emotionally drained because I'm feeling your that's an interesting way to actually address that burnout issue if we can teach it well.
Yeah.
Is that some of the work? And I know the answer to this question. I'm a good lawyer here. I'll answer. I'll ask a question I know the answer to. Is that some of the work that you do with your clients? Is to actually parse this out and teach them to do some of these things in a different way?
Leading the witness.
Guilty as charged.
That's exactly it. It's like the people when some people are born with empathy, and the
Hmm.
empathy they're born with is the affective or the emotional. You can't
Right.
be born with the others. But you can be born with that emotional one. And you see these children who are highly sensitive to all of the things that happen around them. And it's beautiful. And yet without good solid boundaries, they end up being they're the collateral damage.
Yeah.
And so someone who's more naturally a more logical, reasonable, objective, I can separate myself from you and your issue. Um, I think that the thing that we have to teach people is that I can sit with you, I can empathize with you, I can hold space for you and all of your emotions. And that is your issue, not mine.
I want to take a real quick break right now. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about your journey to this point, because starting out as a as a chemist, how did you get here? So we'll explore that when we come back. The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive. Welcome back, folks. My guest today, Dr. Nicole Price, is a chemical engineer that is working in the field of empathy. Now, you talk about an oxymoron potentially. Sparks my curiosity. How did you get here from there?
Oh my gosh, it's such a long story. We don't really have the full time for me to take you through the entire thing, but I will start with I am really good in science and math, and my personality disagrees a little bit. So
I love that.
I'm an engineer, but I still am not like most engineers if we're thinking and using our biases and grouping people together based on, like shared affinity. But because I was good in science and math, people pushed me towards engineering, and I think
Mm-hmm.
I excelled at it. But halfway through my work career, um, interestingly enough, I was not doing well with the people. So as long as I was working in the research department, I was doing fine. As long as I was a frontline engineer in manufacturing, I was doing fine. But when I started leading engineers and technical professionals, people just think because you're doing good that you can be a good leader. And you know better than that. I know better than
Mm-hmm.
that now. But I was given 27 people with no training at all. You can't drive a city bus without training, but they will let you lead people without leadership training.
Yeah. And multi-million-dollar
And so I
enterprises.
was, oh yes, still today, people are still doing this.
Yeah.
And so I was given a coach because my people were screaming foul. And one of the first sessions I had was one on emotional intelligence. And it was about regulating, how do you regulate what you feel so that
Hmm.
people want to work with you. I was exceptional at regulation. What I didn't understand was that you probably still should recognize your feelings, understand your feelings, label your feelings, and express your feelings so that you can regulate them without suppressing them.
Bingo.
And so I was kind of walking through the world, suppressing my emotions. And then my mom died. But my mom died and she was killed by a drunken driver. So we were in the middle of a murder trial that drug on for years. And I finally had gotten to something that my mind couldn't work me out of. My
Hmm.
body was starting to have all kinds of problems associated with it. It was hard for me to focus. So my brain was also struggling a bit. And I remember the day that I went back to work, and I'd been off work for about 5 months. My boss said, "How are you doing, Nicole?" She was really interested in how things were with my mom. But then about 2 minutes later, she's like, "Okay, let's look at this list of things that didn't get done while you were gone for 5 weeks." That that combination, or her trying to combine those two things in that
Hmm.
meeting, caused me to feel like I was not valued in that moment. That's
Yeah.
what I felt. And it was one of the first times that I realized that there's a difference between being nice, and she's a very nice woman, being nice and kind, but then also really caring about people in a way to help you understand that uh, empathy does not have to be the enemy of accountability. I still have work to do.
Yeah.
They're paying me to do work. I know that better than anyone else. But you can't, at the I'm going to work better if I feel like that you value the experiences that I've had. And so when I was struggling with my own personal emotions, I was in therapy, and my therapist was asking me how I feel, and I was more like that engineer you described.
Uh-huh.
I started talking about what I thought about what she said, what I thought about going back to work, what I thought about the murder trial. And he said to me, "You've talked for a really long time, but none of those things were feelings." And it was one of the first times I realized that I had no, I was emotionally immature.
Hmm.
I had nothing.
Hmm.
And to make it worse, I had been taught how to regulate and suppress feelings always come out, but they come out in ugly ways towards the wrong people and at really inconvenient times.
Yeah.
And so I met someone named Ian Roberts at about the same time that this was happening, maybe like a year after. And I was moving on with my life. And he worked for one of the nation's most notoriously dangerous school districts at the time. And he was telling me about his work. And I said, "Oh my gosh, you probably just need to fire everybody and get you a new leadership team." And he asked me, "When was the moment I thought you should fire somebody?" And I said, "Well, the moment you think of it, because that's an indication that there's a problem." And we both laughed. But to shorten that story up, he spent about 4 years working on building my empathy muscle without even saying anything to me about it.
Mm.
And once I finally realized what was happening to me, I said, "My goodness, you've been working with me on this for 4 years." And he just smiled and he said, "Empathy can be taught, my dear." And that was when I said, "Well, we need to teach it to more people." But Blaine, the problem is you can't teach it fast. It's
Right.
not fast. People don't learn to be empathetic fast.
Yep.
And that's a big problem with what I do because people
Yeah.
want things fast.
It's a great opportunity based on what you do as well. I mean,
Yeah,
we before we started the episode, you said some of the most difficult people you work with are those that believe that they're empathetic. Now
correct.
that's my paraphrasing of what you said. In the time that we've got left, can you talk a little bit about that because this is an important topic. Um, everything is a relationship. Everything is a relationship,
Everything.
and I cannot count the numbers of times that I've had to work with leaders that are looking to clean up the collateral damage that they've produced because they weren't aware of what was going on. And awareness is, in large part, has to do with empathy.
Yes, and not
And,
one
and
thing
they
will
and they would say, I'm empathetic, I'm aware.
mm.
Look around, and it's kind of like, maybe not.
Yeah, and that's the challenge because typically the person who calls me, not always, but typically the person who calls me is the one who's going, these people need to be more empathetic. And I'm going, I want you to be more empathetic about why they might not be empathetic right now.
Mhm.
And if I do, when I was an engineer, I used to do what was called time studies, where you would walk around with
Oh
people
yeah,
and figure
oh
out
yes,
time.
Taylor's time and motion studies.
Yes, I have converted those to what I call empathy walks. So my goal is not to time what you're doing. My goal is I'm scanning the landscape for empathy or where it is and where it's missing. And what has been shocking to me is that the people who call and say these people need to be more empathetic have no awareness for what their folks are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. They've never spent any time in those areas. They
Yeah,
couldn't tell me what their top 3 constraints are, nothing. They don't know when you consider what the people are feeling about their organizations. They've never even done any kind of employee engagement surveys. Um, I recently learned about a man who was trying to lead a very large organization, but he hadn't been to see his mom like at home in like 20 years. Well, it's an indication that there's some kind of work, and my mom he loves, right? So
hmm
there's an indication that there's either some kind of work-life balance thing. And how is it that those of us who work with him don't have any insight on that?
yeah,
That means we're not connecting on a personal level in any way. And when I think about the people who are saying the world needs to be more empathetic, they are almost always suggesting that other people need to go first.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm saying if we want to change the world, we have to go first.
That's Gandhi's "Be the change."
You be the change you want to see. Yeah,
Yeah.
I recently something we were interrogating was if you've got boomers, um, older boomers in the workplace, that oftentimes they just kind of push through, right? Like I'm speaking in sweeping generalizations, but they just push through. And if they got a little minor problem, they're going to minimize that problem and just push through. Like
hmm
such is life.
Yeah.
Well, as we've been becoming more and more in touch with our mental health, with the things that make for a more whole life, one where we can leave this leave this thing not torn all apart at the end. We get in touch with our emotions. We don't minimize things.
Right.
Well, more than likely, people will come to me complaining about a boomer rather than saying, what kind of trauma has happened that would cause a person to show up in a way where they minimize the things that hurt them? That's
hmm
empathy, though, to
Yeah.
recognize that you just don't show up that way just because, going back to my idea that everybody wants to wake up every day and have good relationships and do a good job. No one is saying, I want everyone to hate me and I want to screw this whole thing up. No
Yeah.
one.
No one. Folks, Dr. Nicole Price, pearls of wisdom. I mean, I love this conversation. I'm going to have you back on if you wouldn't mind for a reprise.
I
Uh,
think we should do it in Kenya.
I think that would be a grand idea, either that or a barbecue place in Kansas City.
Yeah, let's do that.
I would be very open to that. Where can people find out more about what you're doing, Nicole?
drnicoleprice.com.
Okay. And folks, the book is Spark the Heart. I want you to get a copy of it. It is just filled with a treasure trove of suggestions, ideas, and it will spark your heart. It truly will.
Blaine, I laid out in the entire book the blueprint for how to teach empathy to others.
Magic.
Because I hope that people will think that it's their job as people leaders to develop empathy as a skill set on their teams.
And for parents too, teaching empathy
And
to
for
their
parents.
kids. I think that's a
Yeah.
wonder. I love that. So thank you. Thank you very much. We will be back together again. There is a guarantee embedded in that statement.
I appreciate you having me.
You bet. Folks, you've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Go to the blainebartlett.com website or learn.blainebartlett.com. There's all kinds of resources there that you can use to enhance your effectiveness as a leader, not the least of which is a couple of things that might influence how empathetic you are going forward. My admonition to you as I close off here is find ways in your life to be a center of distribution rather than a center of accumulation. You're going to find your life works a whole lot better when you're working from that framework. Take care, and I'll see you on the next episode. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm, and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.